Chapter 2 continues the same subject, describes the difference between spiritual union and spiritual marriage, explains this by subtle comparisons. Let us now come to treat of the divine and spiritual marriage, although this great favor cannot be fulfilled perfectly in us during our lifetime, for if we were to withdraw ourselves from God, this great blessing would be lost. When granting this favor for the first time, His Majesty is pleased to reveal Himself to the soul through an imaginary vision of His most sacred humanity, so that it may clearly understand what is taking place and not be ignorant of the fact that it is receiving so sovereign a gift. To other people, the experience will come in a different way. To the person of whom we have been speaking, the Lord revealed Himself one day when she had just received communion in great splendor and beauty and majesty, as He did after His resurrection, and told her that it was time she took upon her His affairs as if they were her own, and that He would take her affairs upon Himself. And He added other words which are easier to understand than to repeat. This, you will think, was nothing new, since on other occasions the Lord had revealed Himself to that soul in this way. But it was so different that it left her quite confused and dismayed. For one reason, because this vision came with great force. For another, because of the words which He spoke to her, and also because in the interior of her soul, where He revealed Himself to her, she had never seen any visions but this. For you must understand that there is the greatest difference between all the other visions we have mentioned and those belonging to this mansion. And there is the same difference between the spiritual betrothal and the spiritual marriage as there is between two betrothed persons and two who are united, so that they cannot be separated any more. As I have already said, one makes these comparisons because there are no other appropriate ones. Yet it must be realized that the betrothal has no more to do with the body than if the soul were not in the body and were nothing but spirit. Between the spiritual marriage and the body, there is even less connection, for this secret union takes place in the deepest center of the soul, which must be where God Himself dwells, and I do not think there is any need of a door by which to enter it. I say there is no need of a door, because all that has so far been described seems to have come through the medium of the senses and faculties, and this appearance of the humanity of the Lord must do so too. But what passes in the union of the spiritual marriage is very different. The Lord appears in the center of the soul, not through an imaginary, but through an intellectual vision, although this is a subtler one than that already mentioned, just as He appeared to the apostles without entering through the door when He said to them, Pax vobis. This instantaneous communication of God to the soul is so great a secret and so sublime a favor, and such delight is felt by the soul, that I do not know with what to compare it beyond saying that the Lord is pleased to manifest to the soul at that moment the glory that is in heaven in a sublimer manner than is possible through any vision of spiritual consolation. It is impossible to say more than that, as far as one can understand. The soul, the spirit of this soul, is made one with God, who, being likewise a spirit, has been pleased to reveal the love that He has for us by showing to certain persons the extent of that love, so that we may praise His greatness. For He has been pleased to unite Himself with His creature in such a way that they have become like two who cannot be separated from one another. Even so, He will not separate Himself from her. The spiritual betrothal is different. Here the two persons are frequently separated, as is the case with union, for although by union is meant the joining of two things into one, each of the two, as is a matter of common observation, can be separated and remain a thing by itself. This favor of the Lord passes quickly, and afterwards the soul is deprived of that companionship, so far as it can understand. In this other favor of the Lord, it is not so. The soul remains all the time in that center with its God. We might say that union is as if the ends of two wax candles were joined, so that the light they give is one. The wicks and the wax and the light are all one. Yet afterwards the one candle can be perfectly well separated from the other, and the candles become two again. Or the wick may be withdrawn from the wax. But here it is like rain falling from the heavens into a river or a spring. There is nothing but water there, and it is impossible to divide or separate the water belonging to the river from that which fell from the heavens. Or it is as if a tiny streamlet enters the sea, from which it will find no way of separating itself, or as if in a room there were two large windows through which the light streamed in. It enters in different places, but it all becomes one. Perhaps when St. Paul says, "He who is joined to God becomes one spirit with him," he is referring to this sovereign marriage, which presupposes the entrance of His Majesty into the soul by union. And he also says, "Mihi vivere Christus est, mori lucrum." This, I think, the soul may say here, for it is here that the little butterfly to which we have referred dies, and with the greatest joy, because Christ is now its life. This, with the passage of time, becomes more evident through its effects, for the soul clearly understands, by certain secret aspirations, that it is endowed with life by God. Very often these aspirations are so vehement that what they teach cannot possibly be doubted. Though they cannot be described, the soul experiences them very forcibly. One can only say that this feeling is produced at times by certain delectable words which, it seems, the soul cannot help uttering, such as, "O life of my life, and sustenance that sustaineth me," and things of that kind. For from those divine breasts, where it seems that God is ever sustaining the soul, flow streams of milk, which solace all who dwell in the castle. It seems that it is the Lord's will for them to enjoy all that the soul enjoys, so that, from time to time, there should flow from this mighty river, in which this tiny little spring is swallowed up, a stream of this water, to sustain those who, in bodily matters, have to serve the bridegroom and the bride. And just as a person suddenly plunged into such water would become aware of it, and however unobservant he might be, he could not fail to become so, the same thing may be said, with even greater confidence, of these operations to which I refer. For just as a great stream of water could never fall on us without having an origin somewhere, as I have said, just so it becomes evident that there is someone in the interior of the soul who sends forth these arrows and thus gives life to this life, and that there is a sun whence this great light proceeds, which is transmitted to the faculties in the interior part of the soul. The soul, as I have said, neither moves from that center nor loses its peace, for he who gave his peace to the apostles when they were all together can give peace to the soul. It has occurred to me that this salutation of the Lord must mean much more than the mere words suggest, as must also his telling the glorious Magdalene to go in peace, for the words of the Lord are like acts wrought in us, and so they must have produced some effect in those who were already prepared to put away from them everything corporeal, and to leave the soul in a state of pure spirituality, so that it might be joined with uncreated spirit in this celestial union. For it is quite certain that, when we empty ourselves of all that is creature, and rid ourselves of it for the love of God, that same Lord will fill our souls with himself. Thus, one day, when Jesus Christ was praying for his apostles, I do not know where this occurs, he asked that they might become one with the Father and with him, even as Jesus Christ our Lord is in the Father, and the Father is in him. I do not know what greater love there can be than this, and we shall none of us fail to be included here, for his Majesty went on to say, "Not for them alone do I pray, but also for all who believe in me." And again, "I am in them." O God, help me! How true are these words, and how well the soul understands them, for in this state it can actually see their truth for itself. And how well we should all understand them, were it not for our own fault. The words of Jesus Christ our King and Lord cannot fail. But because we ourselves fail by not preparing ourselves and departing from all that can shut out this light, we do not see ourselves in this mirror into which we are gazing and in which our image is engraved. Let us now return to what we were saying. When our Lord brings the soul into this mansion of his, which is the center of the soul itself, for they say that the empyrean heaven, where our Lord is, does not move like the other heavens. It seems, on entering, to be subject to none of the usual movements of the faculties and the imagination, which injure it and take away its peace. I may seem to be giving the impression that, when the soul reaches the state in which God grants it this favor, it is sure of its salvation and free from the risk of backsliding. But that is not my meaning, and whenever I treat of this matter and say the soul seems to be in safety, I should be understood as meaning for so long as the divine majesty holds it thus by the hand and it does not offend him. At all events, I know for certain that, even when it finds itself in this state, and even if the state has lasted for years, it does not consider itself safe, but goes on its way with much greater misgiving than before, and refrains more carefully from committing the smallest offense against God. It is also strongly desirous of serving him, as will be explained later on. It is habitually afflicted and confused when it sees how little it is able to do, and how great is the extent of its obligations, which is no small cross to it, and a very grievous penance. For the harder the penance which this soul performs, the greater is its delight. Its real penance comes when God takes away its health and strength, so that it can no longer perform any. I have described elsewhere the great distress which this brings, but it is much greater here. This must be due to the nature of the ground in which the soul is planted, for a tree planted by the streams of water is fresher and gives more fruit. So how can we marvel at the desires of this soul, since its spirit is verily made one with the celestial water of which we have been speaking? Returning to what I was saying, it must not be thought that the faculties and senses and passions are always in this state of peace, though the soul itself is. In the other mansions there are always times of conflict and trial and weariness, but they are not of such a kind as to rob the soul of its peace and stability, at least not as a rule. This center of our soul, or spirit, is something so difficult to describe, and indeed to believe, that I think, sisters, as I am so bad at explaining myself, I will not subject you to the temptation of disbelieving what I say, for it is difficult to understand how the soul can have trials and afflictions and yet be in peace. I want to put before you one or two comparisons. God grant they may be of some value, but if they are not, I know that what I have said is the truth. A king is living in his palace. Many wars are waged in his kingdom, and many other distressing things happen here, but he remains where he is, despite them all. So it is here. Although in the other mansions there are many disturbances and poisonous creatures, and the noise of all this can be heard, nobody enters this mansion and forces the soul to leave it, and although the things which the soul hears cause it some distress, they are not of a kind to disturb it or to take away its peace, for the passions are already vanquished, and thus are afraid to enter there, because to do so would only exhaust them further. Our whole body may be in pain, yet if our head is sound, the fact that the body is in pain will not cause it to ache as well. These comparisons make me smile, and I do not like them at all, but I know no others. Think what you will, what I have said is the truth.